All right. Wonderful. I'll let you introduce Libby.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for joining us today. We have Catherine Kidman with us from Wynn's Coonawarra Estate. Have I pronounced it correctly, Catherine?
Correct, yes.
Fantastic.
That's right, Libby.
In South Australia. So she's going to be talking to us today about the viticulture industry, and we're really excited to learn about all things viticulture from Catherine. So I'll hand straight over to you, and looking forward to learning what you have to share with us.
Thanks, Libby. Yes, well, today we're just going to give a bit of a spotlight on the agricultural industry that I work in, which is viticulture and winemaking. So just a little bit of a look at what happens in a day-to-day life of a viticulturist and also the winemaking process. But I thought I'd take you right back to the start and talk about grape growing and winemaking in general. So it can be traced back to the beginning of civilization. So here in Australia, our story is not that old. It's only around 200 years old. So vines are not native plants to Australia. And the vine cuttings arrived with the first fleet actually in 1788 into New South Wales. So Australia's first vines were planted actually overlooking the Sydney Harbour, and later at the MacArthur's property, which is located in Camden Park, southwest of Sydney, for the people that are joining us from New South Wales. So Mr. MacArthur was quite pivotal in the whole foundations of Australian viticulture. He travelled to France in 1816 to collect more vine cuttings because he saw promise, and he saw that the soils of Sydney and potentially of Australia were going to be very good fits for the industry of viticulture and the growing and making of wine. So he further expanded the vineyards not only in New South Wales, but he also encouraged the early settlers in New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria and South Australia to start planting grapevines. So the first commercial vintage of wine was made in 1835, and this was actually in a vineyard near the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. So the other prominent person in the establishment of Australian viticulture was a Scottish-born James Busby. And he also went to France because a lot of the wine growing and viticulture was coming out of the region of France. So he also went to France around the same time, and he collected over 650 different types of vine cuttings. And he planted them all in the Sydney Botanic Gardens. And some of them are still there today. And he also put some more in Mr. MacArthur's property in Camden. So the Busby vine collection is really important because it forms the foundation of our Australian wine industry. So today, the Australian wine regions are separated really based on where they're located in Australia. So we have 65 wine growing regions in Australia, and hopefully you might be able to see, I know some of you are joining us from Western Australia, so you can see these dotted points on the map, which indicate where the regions in WA are, and also New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. So we term these geographical indicators, or GIs for short. And a lot of the wine regions are located mainly around our capital cities, but also the coastal regions and slightly inland regions of the state. So production by state, well, South Australia is the major wine growing and wine producing state. At 51% of all wine and grape production comes from South Australia. And this is followed by New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, Tasmania, and then finally Queensland. So what is a grapevine? Well, a grapevine starts its life in the nursery. First, and it's not a nursery as in a baby nursery, but it's a grapevine nursery where we have all these baby vines being propagated or grown for planting. So they start their life first as a cutting and then as a rootling, which you can see in this picture here. So this is a batch of rootlings that's shortly to go to somebody's vineyard to be planted out to be grown into nice big vines. So the rootlings are planted out into the vineyard, and it can take several years for these vines to really develop their root system, to establish and grow trunks and cordons and produce the fruit that go to make the wine. or the table grapes. So in the vineyard, a vine is made up of the following: the roots, and these live under the ground; a trunk that's really important for carrying the nutrients and water to the cordon, which are the arms of the vine, which support the shoots, which you can see in the green, the leaves and the bunches that grow throughout the season. So throughout the world, there are about 60 species of grapevines grown, and there are some interesting names that go with them, but these are the families of the grapevines, and they include Vitis vinifera, Vitis lambrusca, Vitis riparia, and Vitis rupestris. And these all have different varieties which have evolved within each of these species. So in this table here are some of the more common varieties that are grown in Australia. And I've split them up into 3 different categories. We have white varieties, red varieties, and table grape varieties. So the white varieties are used in white winemaking. And you might be familiar with some of these varieties: Chardonnay, Chenin Blanc, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Viognier. The red varieties are used in red winemaking, but as you can see from the picture, the bunch is more like a purpley colour, but we still call it a red bunch. And the varieties include Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, Merlot, Nebbiolo, Pinot Noir, Sangiovese, Shiraz, and Zinfandel. And then finally, we have another category of varieties known as table grape varieties. So these are the varieties that you might see in your supermarket shelf, and the ones that we eat every day and fresh, and you might have some in your lunchbox today actually. And these include the varieties Concord, Crimson Seedless, Flame, Menindee Seedless, Muscat, and Sultana. And the Sultana grapevines can also be dried, and they dried, and you can have them in as dried fruit that you might also have in little packets that you might put in your lunch boxes as well. So how can you tell the difference between grapevine species? Well, there's a pretty tricky word called ampelography, but it's really just a special name for vine identification. So traditional vine identification involves a visual inspection of the grapevine. So there are several vine parts that we look at in particular that help us distinguish one variety from the other. And these are usually done at specific times of the growing season. So you might look at, for example, the growing shoot tip, the young leaf, and what the colours are looking like on these leaves, the mature leaf from flowering onwards, and of course, what the bunch and the berry structure looks like within the grapevine. Another really good way to see the difference between the variety is to look at the leaf structure in particular. So different varieties might be hairy. So some might have no hair whatsoever on their leaf. They might be quite felty to touch, or even look quite woolly on their leaves. We also can look at what's these structures here, which are known as the lobes. So we can count how many they have. And also some leaves have teeth on them, and we can see what size and shape they are, and that can help us to distinguish what variety we're looking at. We can look at what's known as the petiole sinus, which is this little structure here towards the base of the leaf. Is it a V shape, or is it a U shape? Is it open or closed or overlapping? And we can also look at the overall leaf shape. Is it circular or wedge shaped? So I live in a place called Coonawarra, and the varieties that we grow predominantly are Riesling, Cabernet, and Shiraz. And I went out and picked a few little shoots of each of these 3 different varieties. And I don't know how well this will translate, but hopefully you might be able to see. So here we have a Riesling shoot, and you can see that it's a little bit droopy now because it's quite a hot day outside today. But this shoot here is actually a little bit bronze in its colour, and that distinguishes it from the other varieties. If we wanted to look at the leaf itself, we can count the different lobes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of pronounced lobes. And if I take this off and look at the petiole sinus, you can see that, well, hopefully you can see that it's more of a U shape and the leaves overlap a little. This is different to the Cabernet leaf, which is actually quite a different colour. You might be able to see. It's a lot greener and it has more defined teeth. And you might also be able to note that the petiole sinus is more of a V shape. So these are all just little tips and tricks that we can use to help us identify what varieties we have in our vineyard. So as I mentioned, I live in a wine region called Coonawarra, which is located about halfway between Adelaide and Melbourne. Here's a video of some of our vineyards within the region. And at this point, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional people of this region on which we live and farm, which are the Pinchunga and Boandik people. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So I'm going to play this video about my home. So, what makes Coonawarra so special? Well, it's the soil. So Terra Rossa is what we call our main soil type of the region, which translates to red earth. And you can see this because the top layer of this particular picture is red in colour. And it's this colour because it's made up of oxidised iron, which, like a rusty tin, gives that lovely burnt orange red colour over our white limestone. What's also unique is that this red layer of soil is not very deep, and you can see it's quite variable and changes throughout the soil profile. In addition, it's a clay. So it doesn't behave like a clay and has a consistency which is different. It's a bit more sort of loamy or sand shaped in its particle sizes. And when you break it apart, it forms these sort of heads, which allows for the rainfall and the irrigation to drain through. It's a very favourable physical structure that allows for good vine growth. So our grapevines have a natural balance because they're grown in this soil. We're also a lovely cool climate region here in Coonawarra. So whilst we do get quite hot in the summer, we're not so far from the ocean here, and we don't have many hills, which means that when the cooling breezes come off the ocean, they actually circulated across the coast to us here in Coonawarra, which means that while it can be hot during the day, we get those lovely cooling night temperatures, which helps us to sleep at night, but also helps the vines recover from that stressful hot day. Okay, I have a challenge for you. It's challenge time and it's called Sawyer Undies. So this is an initiative of Cotton Info, and also my friend, Dr. Mary Retallick from Eco Vineyards suggested this would be a great idea for you guys to do at your school. So it's a challenge for you in your schoolyards, and it's called Sawyer Undies to better understand your soil health at your school. So what you need is 2 pairs of cotton undies or a cotton singlet. Maybe your younger brother or sister might have one of these. And you need to choose 2 spots of soil within the school. So perhaps you might have a community veggie garden or the side of a school oval, for example. And what would be really great is if you could bury your undies in just the top portion of this soil, but make sure you mark out where you do this. And you can come back in 1 to 2 months' time and watch what happens to these undies. So it's a really good understanding of soil health. So if there's not much left of these undies, as you can see in this top right corner, it indicates that you have excellent biological activity and lots of yummy microbes munching away at those cotton undies. And it's a good indicator of healthy soil. So these same organisms can break down plant materials in very much the same way. So this is a little experiment that I challenge you all to do at your schools. It's a bit of fun, and you might like to add some food for these microbes to nibble on, such as sheep manure or chook manure, to help speed up the process and see if there's any differences in the addition of this to the munching down of those undies. So there's a little challenge. I would have liked to have shown you what we were doing in our vineyards, but unfortunately we can't get out into them today. So I'd love to see some Sawyer Undies challenges coming back from you all. So the annual growth cycle of a grapevine. So I just thought I'd take you through what happens in the year of growing grapes. And we start with winter. In winter time is pruning time. So the vines have no shoot growth on them at all. It's dormant and it's cold. And it's generally this time when we prune our vines to get them ready for the spring that's about to come. And at this point in time, we use implements such as mechanical pre-pruners, which just chop all that last year's pruning growth down, just so that the pruner can come through and clean up the canes to prune to a level that we want for the shoots to grow in the springtime to come. So in springtime, we have this lovely new burst of new shoot growth from the prunings that we've just done in winter. In wintertime, we generally have our sheep in the vineyard that are acting as our lawn mowers and providing good compost and organic matter back into the vineyards. And in springtime, we get these sheep out because they do like to nibble on our fresh green shoots. And we're really preparing these vineyards for the season ahead. So this is late spring and summer is when the shoots are really starting to grow. And then we get to a point called flowering, which I'll explain about a little bit later on. In late summer, early autumn, we go through a process known as veraison, which is when, for red grapes, when the green berries turn a lovely red or purpley colour that signifies that they're starting to become ready to harvest. And then in autumn time is when we pick our grapes and ready for harvest. And then it goes through the cycle. Here's a little video of some of the techniques that we do at springtime to help us control our shoot figure. So this here is a tractor that's got some mechanical shoot thinners on them, and they actually take out the shoots so that the vine is nicely balanced and that the shoots that are remaining have a lot of light able to get into the bunches, which help to create the flavours and the colour that we want at the end of harvest time. And then harvest time comes along and we tend to either hand pick our fruit or we drive a mechanical harvester over the top. So this mechanical harvester actually drives over the top of the vines, and it has a series of rods inside that gently sort of shake the vine to get the berries off the cordon and into these belts, which then feed the berries up into these big containers that then go to the winery for processing. So here's a little video I took a few days ago about springtime in the vineyard.
In the life of a viticulturalist at this time of the year is pretty busy. The sheep have not long left the vineyards that we have been over pruning, and as you can see, spring has sprung. It's an absolute picture perfect day here in Terra Rossa. And just like the vines, the season is full of anticipation and excitement. As you can see, the vines are an absolute treat at this time of year, and they're full of promise and hope for the season to come. So what, as a viticulturalist, we're trying to do is really get them in balance. So it's all about line balance at this time of the year. The vines have woken up from dormancy and they're really putting all their energy and their nutrients that they've stored over winter into growing new cuttings and shoots. We're just about to enter into a terminology called the grand period of shoot growth, and this occurs just before flowering. It's quite energy intensive, and we want to make sure that the vines have got enough nutrition and nutrients to help with growing leaves, sustain carbohydrates, and growing synthesis in the sun. So things like nutrient deficiency at this time of the year.
Catherine, unfortunately, I can only just hear you in the video. It's only getting every few words. So unfortunately, we're probably not hearing it as well as you are, I'm afraid.
Okay, sorry. Right.
That's fine.
Would you like me to stop it?
We need bees to help set the fruit for the seasonal bag. We love bees and
That's a little bit better with volume.
as a viticulturalist, we're always watching the weather. It is a legendary to
No, unfortunately, we're probably not getting the full benefit of the video. I'm sure it's so wonderful as well.
Sure. All right. I might skip then. Right. So sorry about that. I apologise that that audio didn't come through, but I was really just trying to show you a few different things that are happening in the vineyard right now here in Coonawarra. And I talked a little bit about where we're at the moment, which is called the grand period of shoot growth, which is basically when the vines wake up from dormancy and they put all their energy and carbohydrates into producing the canopy for the growing season. So this is a very energy and carbohydrate intense process. And at this time in the vineyard, what we're doing a lot of as viticulturalists, we're walking through and making sure that the vines are healthy, that they've got that lovely green character to the leaves, and that they're not showing any signs of deficiency or any signs of stress, because really at this point in time, it's all about making sure the vine is happy and establishing a really lovely canopy that will see it through the year. In addition, we're just about 3 weeks away from flowering and fruit set, which is such an interesting time. And I've got a little picture here showing you flowering and fruit set. So we're just sort of in between the far left and middle of the picture stage. So these little green structures are called inflorescence, and they go on to become the bunches later on in their life. But at this point in time, they're little structures that are called inflorescence. And flowering generally occurs about a month to 6 weeks after bud burst, or usually when the vine has around 17 fully expanded leaves on the canopy. So that's why it's really important to make sure that they're happy to get that leaf fully expanded and grown. So as I mentioned, the flower clusters are called inflorescence, which just before flowering, so at this point in time, they're starting to separate and turn a little bit yellow and get ready for the bloom. So flowering occurs when these little caps here fall off, and the technical term is dehiscence, and they really just sort of pop. And this occurs throughout the vineyard. And you get a beautiful vineyard smells of these lovely sweet aromas. It's quite a sweet smell that comes through with flowering, and it's a very pretty time within the vineyard. So although the bees are buzzing around at this time in the vineyard, they're not essential to the grape for pollination, because the grapevine is really unique. It has both the male and the female structures all in one. And you can see in this image here, this is the lovely little grapevine flowers. And there's usually about 5 of the male anthers, and then there's the female structure in the middle. So because they have both male and female structures, they can self-pollinate and develop their own seeds. So there can be up to 300 or sometimes more flowers on these inflorescence structures. And I know this because we count each of these flowers to see how many there are, not on every vine within the vineyard, but on a selection of vines. And when we do this, it's quite important. It forms part of our yield estimation. So we count the flowers to give us an indication of whether we're going to have a lot of potential berries that turn into the bunch, and it just helps us to see what the season is going to bring. So we count these flowers, and it's a measure later on that we do, which helps us to calculate the fruit set. So what proportion of flowers were able to self-pollinate and form seeds and set fruit for the coming season. So just by the nature of the vineyard, nearly 50% of these flowers don't set any fruit. So it's not an easy process for these grapevines to do. So this picture here on the far right is a picture that I've taken, which is a cross section under a microscope of one of these flowers. And so it's been stained with a fluorescent dye that shows all the male, so these little pollen tubes germinating, and the male pollen tubes germinate and they grow a pollen tube, and all these little male pollen tubes are racing down to the female ovules where they will fertilize to create a seed, and then that seed goes on to create a bunch. So it's a pretty cool process that they go through. So during flowering, however, the delicate grape flowers, they're really vulnerable to the damage from a windy sort of time, rain, or low temperatures, which is sometimes what we suffer here in Coonawarra. So if you have a favourable conditions, it will result in a lovely, perfectly formed bunch with very even berry development and lots of lovely seeds encased. But if we do have those poor conditions that I talked about, where it's raining or it's very windy or cool conditions, you can end up with problems with fruit set. And it's a terminology, French terminology, which is called couleur or millerondage. And essentially it's just really an uneven berry and bunch, and it doesn't look very pretty at all. And it can cause us headaches later on down the track because you've got some unripe green berries in amongst these big, normally ripening berries. So it can cause quite a headache really in terms of ripening. So with the odds stacked against us, we as viticulturalists and vineyard managers try and do everything we can to ensure that we have a good fruit set. Of course, a lot of it's down to Mother Nature, but we try and make sure that make sure that the vine is in its best position going into flowering and fruit set. So in the video, I also talked about irrigation management. So one of the other main roles that I perform as a viticulturalist during the growing season is really focusing in on irrigation. And it's really that Goldilocks story. We want to make sure that our vines don't have too much water or too little water, but they have just the right amount of water. And there's a number of techniques that we use in our vineyards to help us decide on irrigation management. Water is a really precious resource, and we don't want to be putting too much on when the vine actually doesn't need it. So we look at the soil moisture. So we have soil moisture probes put in our vineyards at different depths, and we can see how quickly the vine is sucking up that soil moisture, and when we need to irrigate it, or when a rainfall comes, that will give the water to the vine. In addition, we also have another technique called a pressure bomb. So this is what I tend to do during the summer months is run around with this pressure bomb. So this is a little tool that helps us to ask the vine actually how thirsty it is. And this little cartoon here are the measurements that show us when we actually need to start irrigating and when the vines are really starting to get quite stressed. So this is a measure where we put a little section of the grapevine into this canister here, this black sort of canister, and we pump the canister full of compressed nitrogen, which gives us an indication of how stressed the vine is, how much energy or pressure it takes to push the xylem sap through the top, gives us a measure of how much water we need to put back to these vines and how stressed they actually are. So the pressure bomb measurement, typically we can do really early in the morning. So it's called a pre-dawn measure, which is not all that fun, but it's a very good measure to do. Or we do midday stem water potentials, which is a good overview of how the vine is actually feeling and whether it needs a drink or not. The soil moisture monitoring technique is consistent of continuously logging the uptake of the vine, and it's always generating that information and that data for us to look at. So it's a combination of techniques that help us with our irrigation management, and it's probably one of the most important tools that we have to help us with our the growth of our vines, but also our fruit quality at the end of the season. So with that, I thought I might leave you with some information on how red wine is made. So at the end of the season, we've grown our grapes and developed a beautiful bunch. And this is a little video about what happens when it goes from the vineyard into the winery. And there you have it. That's a little bit of an insight into the viticulture and winemaking process here in Australia. So I'd just like to acknowledge Patrick Ireland and co-authors of Australian Wine, from which I took a lot of today's content and images from, along with Wine Australia for their image content, statistics and videos. And finally, I'd like to thank Wynn's Coonawarra Estate. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I hope you've enjoyed today's spotlight on viticulture and winemaking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was a really, really fantastic view into your world, with some really accessible information for all the students who may be watching and participating with your presentation. So thank you so much for sharing all of your information with us, and really, really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Catherine. Yes, I'm sorry we didn't have more of a turnout, but unfortunately, the circumstances in South Australia has prevented those classes joining in. But we do have the recording, and what